Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to begin by welcoming those members of the public or press who have joined us today, either in person or watching via the live stream, to this meeting of the Community Social Mobility and Inclusion Committee at New Shire Hall in Alconbury Weald. The County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures, tweet or blog during the meeting, but could I please request that members of the committee and the public turn their mobile phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place. There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, please leave by the nearest marked fire exit and assemble in the car park. So we'll go straight to item 1, which is apologies for absence and declarations of interest. Nick, to report, please.
Thank you, Chair. There are apologies from Councillor French.
Thank you, Nick. And does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? I'd have one. I'm actually a board member of Hunts Forum. I'm appointed by this council to that organisation, and we have Julie with us, who's from Hunts Forum today. But just to let members know about that. So moving on to item 2, I'm being asked to approve the minutes of the last committee meeting, which was held on the 6th of July, as a correct record. Can I ask whether any member disagrees with the accuracy of these minutes, or if there are any matters arising that members wish to raise? Councillor Batchelor.
Thank you. Don't disagree, but I wasn't here, so we'll have to leave the accuracy to others. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Daunton.
I don't disagree at all. I've just got 2 comments or questions. Would you like to take those now? Or yes, okay, thank you. So under point 128, which is on page 7 of the agenda, on the second paragraph, just wondered if there was any update on the planned work with Capalc. And then also just a bit further down on that, in that same section, drew attention to the fact that many of the projects cut across the work of different committees, and wondered if, I think there were plans whether or not to have maybe a development session on cross-committee working. So those are my 2 questions.
Okay, thank you. Lisa, did you want to deal with that if you can? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so on the point of Capalc, I can update that I have around about 6 weekly meetings with the chief exec there, Penny. So we do talk about links between the county council and the wider organisations that Capalc represents. But I'm also aware that our chief exec, Stephen Moyer, attended the Capalc conference that took place in September and did a presentation about the county council there. And off of the back of that, we've also got a meeting in the pipeline between the chief exec, myself and Sue Grace as executive director with the chief exec of Capalc.
Thank you. Does that answer your questions, Claire? Okay, brilliant. If there's no other comments, then oh, sorry, there was a second question. I do apologise.
And thank you. And on the question around a development session about working across committees, I'll take that forward and discuss it with colleagues in Democratic Services. Perhaps that's something we can use one of the members' seminars for. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. If there's nothing else, then I see no objections to the minutes, so I'll sign them as approved. Thank you. And now we move to item 3, which is public questions and petitions. We haven't received any for this meeting, so we'll go straight to item 4, which is the Coroner Service Mortuary Facilities Contract. That's a key decision and will be presented by the Coroner's Services Business Manager, Rachel Loveridge. Sorry, Jeff, yeah.
I'm almost embarrassed to ask this question. In fact, it is a question that I'm a point of order out, possibly from my misunderstanding. Why are we debating this paper? Why is it this committee that deals with a procurement matter when there is a procurement committee?
Well, I think it's because it falls under the coroner's service falls under the responsibility of this committee. I think that's the main reason. So an opportunity for us to give our steer on how we want it to go. That will be my understanding. Was that correct?
Yeah, no, the Assets and Procurement Committee deal with procurement that's specific to the corporate side of the council's work, whereas the procurement for specific services stay within that committee.
No harm in asking. Thank you, Councillor Steve. So Rachel, over to you, and you're also joined by Peter Jell as well. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm here today to request that we can start the procurement process for the mortuary provision for the coroner service. I think you've all seen a copy of the report, so I'm just going to highlight a few key areas for you. In order for the coroner to be able to fulfil their statutory duty, it is necessary to have arrangements in place for mortuary services, and this includes body storage and also post-mortem facilities. And it's the council's responsibility to be able to provide these services for the coroner. Current services are provided by Cambridge University Hospital, or Addenbrooke's Hospital, TUNI, and North West Anglia NHS Foundation Trust at Peterborough City Hospital. There are 2 contracts in place, as not one provider is able to meet the capacity or the needs that we need. So the contract held by Cambridge University Hospital expires on the 31st of March 2024. So there's need to commence the procurement exercise just to ensure that the tender process is complete before the 1st of April 2024. By completing the full procurement process, we're able to have an opportunity to improve contract terms and also limit the potential of cost increases. So the initial term of the contract will be for 3 years, but there will be an option to be able to extend it for 2. As you can imagine, there is a limited market available for the mortuary provision. We did consider the in-house option a few years ago, but it was deemed to be unsuitable due to financial and also practical reasons. So what we're going to ask the tenders to bid for will be for body storage, providing us with facilities and the equipment required to complete the postmortems, the staff to complete the postmortem examinations and also care for the deceased. And also we'll be requesting that the examinations are conducted as soon as possible. So that's just the highlights from the report. Has anybody got any questions?
Thank you, Rachel. Councillor Ambrose Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, thank you for your report. At page 20, 2.5, procurement process is seeking mortuary provision only for the south of the county, with a separate contract with NFAFT due to expire on the 31st of
David, can I just ask you if you could just use the microphone? That's a great thing.
on the 31st of March. Did you get all of that? Did you get all of that? Thank you very much. It's for the south of the county. So there's 2 contracts.
Yeah, that's correct. So we did the one for the north of the area last year. So that started on the 1st of April this year. This is just for the south of the region, so with a different area.
Thank you for that. I'm new to the committee, you see.
That's fine.
Okay, thank you, David. Councillor Batchelor.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate we're not going to go down this route, but I was interested in the in-house option. So what would have that entailed had we gone down that route? Would that mean essentially building or purchasing our own facilities or storing them, somewhere in Alconbury?
Yes, it's something that we did explore, and yeah, you are very, very correct there. It would be looking to build our own facilities. It's also trying to draw in the required sort of expertise into those facilities, and that's sometimes a challenge when the expertise required obviously base themselves in hospitals as well. So there were a number of practical implications as well as the financial and cost and capital challenges that we would have with such a facility. But I think it's fair to say that we keep a view on the landscape, and should opportunities arise either through collaborations with other local authorities, then all options remain open at some point. But at the moment, having explored it, this is the best option for us in a limited market, to be fair.
Thank you, Councillor Steve.
Just following on from that, I just wanted to ask, what options are there? How many providers are there realistically? 2, 3? Are they other hospitals? Are they private provider? I can't imagine be a private provider, but what are the options that you're looking at?
There are the only hospitals that we've got in our area that can meet the needs are Peterborough City Hospital and Adam Brooks Hospital. So if we were then to explore and go over the boundary of the area, it would then have additional costs on moving the deceased. And also we want to try and keep the deceased close to their families. So, you know, not move them further away if necessary as well.
Thank you, Rachel. Anybody else have a question on this at all? Alex, Councillor Beulah.
Just to follow up on the discussion around the in-house provision, I was wondering if other similar councils have in-house provision, or actually this model is the most common model. I understand the financial and practical pressures of this, but I was just wondering how it compares like across the UK, if you had any examples of how it works in other councils.
Yeah, this is the model that, you know, is used across most of the UK. I mean, also to pick up on the last point that was raised in relation to sort of capacity within the area. Currently, neither hospital have the ability to pick up and provide that service across the whole of the jurisdiction. If that were to be the case, that again provides more options, because from a competitive perspective, that effectively gives one option to compare against the other. We're not in that position at the moment, so we do rely on both providers. We have been in discussions with them, again, just to float if what would be the potential for them to have, or to increase capacity when they're looking, you know, forward planning in relation to their own facilities, to be able to provide more capacity in the future. So should that be available, then that's something that would certainly help in our procurement. So we have floated that to the providers, because it would be something we'd be interested in, either two providers or a single one, if that provided better value for the local authority.
Thank you. Councillor Satcher and then Councillor Seif.
Thank you. I would, from my own experience, like to warmly support the importance of having the mortuary and post-mortem facilities as close as possible to the wards. Obviously, not all hospitals are in that position, but I live near Adam Brooks and I've been in the position as a friend to carry the body of a small baby, but rather than a more impersonal carrier. And just walking along the corridors, and also as a nurse, to be able to have the privilege of watching postmortems, and knowing that also the clinical students from the medical side were also in that position to learn. And if it's something that is totally separate from life, I don't think it's quite as effective. So I would thoroughly support your way of proceeding. Thank you.
Okay, did you want to say anything at that point, or is it Peter? No, you're okay. That's good. Jeff.
Yeah, the reason I hesitated before, and indeed asked the question that I did at the beginning, or what I considered possibly a point of order, I can't get my head around procurement when you've only got two public sector players bidding or tendering or responding to a tender process. And I want to ask a very specific question. I mean, do you ask them for a price? Do you negotiate from where you are at the moment, or is it a cost plus type of arrangement, which then at least would make it a fair evaluation? How do you go about procurement when you've only got two public sector players?
So we are following the procurement laws that we're being advised to follow by the council's procurement team. So we ask them a series of questions to fill out about the quality of the services that they'll provide, and also the pricing as well. This is also an opportunity for us to review our contracts that we've got with them at the moment, and to make the terms better, and hopefully to save money in the long run as well.
Do they bid a price, or do you work it from a cost up basis?
Yes, they bid a price. Yeah.
I think there are still opportunities through this process to mitigate against cost rises, and that's something we've done. It's quite successful on the last contracts in effect, because as we found during the pandemic, there are additional costs that were being picked up through the trust that were being passed on to us as a local authority. And what we've been doing very much, we're coming around to contract procurements, is looking quite closely at the detail about where are those opportunities for cost inflation that we can minimise and remove, or as far as some of the conditions that we put out there tender. And at the end of the day, the other providers have an opportunity to bid or not to bid for the contract. So we do stipulate the terms. So and though we have seen cost inflation, as we've seen across the board as a local authority and others, there is still an ability to make sure we get the best value out of a limited market for the authority. So it's not an ideal. We'd ideally like 5 or 6 providers, quite clearly, but it isn't a case of they totally just stipulate the terms and the cost, and we can apply the weighting to the procurement with regards to quality and cost to reflect the landscape that the local authorities in at the time. And there have been providers that in the past where there is a slightly wider market that have not met the quality criteria and therefore have not progressed. So it does ensure that we're compliant with legal requirements and those governance rules, which quite clearly, if we don't, then we do end ourselves in quite a difficult position and potentially open to things like judicial review. So that's why we do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Criswell.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. By way of explanation, it was me that provided this challenge under the previous administration because there were limited options, as you've heard, as for this facility. So it was certainly felt worth investigating whether we could have our own facility and perhaps provide an income stream by serving others and adding to the competition, if you like. But as Peter has said, that's proved not to be fruitful. So, but I'm still pleased that we went down that avenue and investigated it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. Anybody else before we go to the recommendations? Well, first of all, thank you both of you for a very thorough report, for all the work you're doing, for coming here today and answering questions and presenting. So we have 2 recommendations. A is to approve the commencement of the procurement process for mortuary provision in the south of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough coronal jurisdiction, and B, to delegate authority to the Executive Director of Place and Sustainability in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of the Communities Committee to award and execute the contract for mortuary facilities. I'm detecting that we're in agreement on this, so unless I've misjudged that, I think we'll happily take that as read. Thank you very much. Thank you both. And the next item is the annual report for the Coroner Service, which will be presented by the Service Director of Regulatory Services, Peter Gell. And I'd also like to welcome the Senior Coroner, David Hemming, who's also joined us this morning. Welcome, David. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And as I'm delighted that David's been able to join us this morning. He has been busy earlier, so he's hot-footed it himself over from Peter actually this morning. He also had the report. I will talk through some of the highlights, but I think with David here is a great opportunity to ask any questions afterwards. So I'll try not to take up too much of your time. I think just picking up on a number of areas, I think one of the things to note is actually there was an increase in referrals through to the service last year. Potentially there's some impact as a result of the pandemic and probably delayed treatments in hospitals, but it's quite a significant rise that we saw last year. And as members of the committee will be aware, we've been battling for a couple of years in historical backlog with cases over 12 months that we put a lot of effort into tackling. And as you will see later on in the report, under the performance section, not only we dealt with last year that additional 10%, but we're able to make some inroads and certainly into those very older cases, some of those very difficult ones to move, but also the numbers in total were able to reduce, which I think was a tremendous effort from the whole team to do that. I think other things I'd like to pick out, although the committee are very keen to understand some of those trends and things that we see in one of those ones which is concerning, is that increase in suicide conclusions during the past few years. And one of the areas where, again, the committee often asks is, are the things that we learn from some of those tragic cases that help prevent future deaths? And that is something that the coroners look at very seriously. Are there sort of problems, systematic issues, things going on that can change? And where that is the case, those prevention of future deaths reports are produced, and there was 7 that have sort of been highlighted last year. Sometimes they can cover more than one particular category. And on occasions, those can also involve the local authority. So that could be a highways matter, for example, it could be a social care matter. So at times we will also be an interested party, in the coroner in his or her judicial role will be independent from the local authority in that respect, but there will be at times learnings and things as the council and other named parties where they can make a difference in the future are named. But that's just one of the areas we link into a lot of partnership groups. Just recently, David and myself and colleagues, we met with directors from social care from both Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, again, just looking about how collaboratively we can work together to take some of the lessons and things that we learn, some of the concerns that we may have, to try and make improvements within the sector and the system. And it's really good personally for me to see that stance and positive approach has been taken following some sort of difficult circumstances. Now, one of the things that's really important is the sort of assurance, really, that how is the service actually doing, and we report annually to the chief coroner. And I think one of the areas to me which gives a real indication in their confidence of the team that we have here is the Hertfordshire case, which I'm sure David will be happy to talk about in more detail should we have some questions later. But that is one where, again, there were problems in the way it was handled in Hertfordshire, and the chief coroner asked this jurisdiction to pick that up and to run with that. And as you can imagine, once something has gone wrong, there's a lot of interest around that. There are a lot of parties that are quite keen to explore things like judicial review potentially. So to pick that up is quite a challenging position to be in. I'm pleased to say all the costs associated with that are borne by Hertfordshire. So that's not something that we picked any costs for, but we're given that in order to take that forward, and that's something that the service has done well, and it's now been concluded. What we tried to do again with this report is highlight some of those areas where I think we stand out amongst others, and sort of organ donations and the work that David himself has particularly led is one of those. And I think, I'm sure, as the report highlights, at times it's difficult, and some coroners have found it very difficult to decide whether they can release organs, because were they required in relation to for the determination of the cause of death or associated with criminal investigations. And through looking at things carefully, that there are ways in order to obtain the required evidence, but also to be able to release body parts. And I think we've shown in the past, and through the work that David and has been pushed nationally in the guidance that's been released, is actually there's a lot more lives being saved now than there was the case a number of years ago, and we continue to push that. And I think one of the things, again, which is also quite moving, is when you actually hear some of the real life stories from those parties they've allowed the organs to be used from their loved ones, and those parties that have received organ donations, and we do hear some of those real life stories back in the team, and that's what makes the job very worthwhile. Many of the team. Phased deaths is another one of those areas where we stand out, and that's respecting and understanding that actually for some communities it does really matter when somebody can be buried, when decisions can be made, and not having to wait over a weekend. And again, not all jurisdictions will offer that, but this jurisdiction has, and that's down to personal commitment from particularly David, but members of the team, to be able to process some of the paperwork that allows things to move forward. And that is something, again, which is demonstrated as best practice elsewhere. Within the report, we highlight some of the performance, and just in sheer numbers, how they've changed. So we can see that back in 2021, we had a backlog of 256. We then had the pandemic, and you can imagine that had a huge impact across the whole country, but certainly within the coroner's service, that meant we weren't able to continue with inquests of things as we were previously. So we had again an increase then, but we're now on the downward trajectory. It was 278 last year. The work continues in that respect, and we're working carefully to make sure that number again continues to go in the right direction, but a massive effort went into those older cases, and they're old, as I say, for a real reason. Is a lot of them are very difficult, very challenging as far as accessing some of the expertise required to help inform the work that the coroners do. As far as the reason for any delays of cases over 12 months, there are some standard categories that we report to the chief coroner. And just to highlight, really, there's quite a marked change between 2021 and 21 and 22, the sort of reporting years that we can report on at the moment, between delays due to complexity and awaiting specialist reports. So one of the things we've seen what has happened and the challenges that the NHS have had in recent times, not just because of the pandemic, delayed treatments, the challenges around pay and strikes, but in effect, what we've seen between those 2 years, delays in relation to waiting specialist reports and complexity moving up from 46% to 85%. And that is outside largely the control of the service. We have, through the use of technology, we're using virtual means for that experts to access and dial in to support the inquest or process where possible. And that has certainly helped. But there will be occasions, certainly some of those areas where operations or something may have gone wrong is at the leading edge of technology. There are limited experts, and we do rely on their expertise to help inform cases going forward. Highlighted really under the sort of finance and contracts, and also we saw the procurement request earlier, just to say that one of the biggest challenges we have as a service financially, as some of the inflationary costs coming through on the contracts, that's a significant cost for the service. And these are services that we can't do without. So we are seeing what we can do as to get best value for the procurements. I think one of those areas where we have been successful in reducing costs is around external venue hire, and that is by using in essence 3 facilities at the moment for inquests. So it's the Lawrence Court facility we have just down the road. We do use this facility as well, and we're also using the Peterborough Town Hall facilities as well. And although there was the old costs associated with those, we're not internally having to pay for those as we would do for external venue hire. A number of members will recall we did previously use the court system, and because of the backlog there, we lost access to that, or when it was proposed, we may have some more. What we were finding is we were getting cancelled very late on, which isn't really acceptable to customers and friends and family and experts that were due to appear when you have to say at very short notice, actually today's off. So again, we're using the facilities that we have, which to be fair gives a good spread across our jurisdiction. And ultimately, to make it work does require some careful planning, as we're using shared facilities. So that really is a fly through for me. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'm sure you're keen to hear from David as well. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions for Peter at this point? So we've got Claire and then Philippa, and followed by Jeff.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the report, which makes really interesting and sober reading. There's a couple of mentions of prevention of future deaths reports. I'd like to know what force they have in law and how we follow through those reports. Thanks.
Hi. We cannot, unlike the Australian coroners, make a recommendation. The Australian coroners have a specific power to do that, and one sees it frequently in the Australian decisions, which are laid out on their websites for all to see. All that we can do is to express a concern, and so it's a very diluted version of what's done elsewhere. It carries very little weight in truth. I suspect, lawyers for families will use them more and more to say, well, that was the concern that was expressed, 2 years ago in this report. What's happened since? Why haven't there been any changes? There is a requirement to respond within 56 days. The biggest non-responder is the government. there is now a tracker that's a phenomenal tool for many people to access if they want to look at those.
Do you think that there is anything that we as this committee or the county council could do to help in that?
It's, you know, the response time is there. There should be a response, but quite often there is not, and there is no power thereafter on the part of the coroner to go back and say, where's your response? You can sort of say, well, we're still awaiting. If you want to extend time for response, you can, but there it stops. But they are, you know, we are at the forefront in a way of health and safety on many matters, whether it's within hospitals, highways, you know, other aspects of product liability and so on. That's the broad range of deaths that we encounter. I did a PFD with regard to a number of suicides from a car park in Peterborough, and that did work. It's fair to say we had 6 suicides in 5 months, and people were traveling from out of the area to come to the car parks in Peterborough to jump. The wall on the top section was 1 meter high, and it had a rail on it, so you could use the rail to actually vault over. And so a point came that there'd been huge resistance to fencing off the car parks, but there was a public health paper issued from some research done in Bristol on the Clifton Suspension Bridge, which showed that the rate of suicide dropped when they fenced off a bridge there. And so we were able to use that in the PFD to say, well, this is what public health research is now showing. It doesn't just shift the problem off elsewhere. And it's a powerful statement if you have a preventative measure as well. And they did. They fenced it off, and we've never had another fatality at that spot.
Thank you. That's was quite sobering. It's something you probably deal with on a regular basis, of course, but it's really brings it home to you, doesn't it?
It does. When
things like that happen. And I just wanted to follow up on 2.23 of the report and the case in Hertfordshire, and I'm just wondering if there's something we could do as a committee or a council. Obviously, that refers to a person who took their own life because of coercive behaviour, a young mother. And I'm assuming from that it was related to domestic violence. And of course, we have responsibility for policies to try and prevent and report domestic violence. I'd wonder as a committee if we can learn a lesson from that, and perhaps our team can. I think they are aware. I did actually speak to them the other week. They're aware of that case. I think it was a landmark decision whereby the abuse and this was related to the suicide, and that was an unlawful act of manslaughter. So I think perhaps we need to ensure that doesn't happen in Cambridgeshire as much as we can. That might be something we can pick up. But Philippa, followed by Jeff.
Yeah, there is a thing called a domestic homicide review, which is undertaken, you know, with regard to suicides from a domestic situation like that, and one is seeing that as a feature more and more in DHRs or domestic homicide reviews. And in fact, a report landed on my desk literally only last week of a male suicide arising out of domestic abuse. And in fact, on a personal level, I was actually walking through Peterborough the other day, and I saw a lady in huge distress who was clearly being harassed like nothing else. And when I spoke to her and said, look, you need some help, you know, what emerged then was threats to kill that were being made to her, and various other very serious matters, which she was prepared to chat to me about. So fortunately, I was taking the milk back to the coroner's office. I do go out and buy the milk for the tea, believe it or not. And outside the centre were 2 police officers. So I said, you've got to go and see this lady, and immediately, because this is a serious matter, and they did. And it just shows, you know, it's a worrying trend in many areas.
Absolutely, and well done for doing what you did there. Philippa, Jeff, and then Lucy.
Yes, that last replies to a question I was going to ask in following up these, as you say, landmark thing. Thank you for the report, clear and informative as ever. And one of the it's a sobering one, but it does give you the opportunity to feel totally undeserved pride in the service that is provided in Cambridgeshire. So my congratulations that is clear from the Hertfordshire it's a case being given to us and carried out so well by you. And we hope that indeed does in future, you know, these PFDs, a review actually does come to something. We'll be wanting to follow that up. Councillor Daunton has also pressed you on one of our other local concerns, which came up from the Waterbeach collision. The issues regarding dementia and whether self-certification should be in any way re-examined are sobering for people of my age reading such reports. Clearly, that needs a lot of thinking about. Obviously, you have not been, you can't show that you immediately influenced, but I'm sure what you've said will make that consideration. And together with the problems in the local roads that you identified, clearly lowering speed limits is a key. You know, if high speeds kill, lower speeds maim, shall we say, being not too complacent about it. And I know we have some of that in hand, but it strengthens our views across the different service committees, and thank you for that. Such things are tough, and we'll be following it up as best we can, I'm sure. So thank you for those. I think everybody's covered everything else. I'm glad you were able to push a little bit more flexibility with organ donation. We were losing so many good organs in the past that we now can, as long as the family are happy, make good use of, and quite therapeutic use sometimes for all concerned. Thank you, and thank you for the report.
I think that's a really important point. You know, the skill of the organ donation nurse is known as SNOD, so specialist nurse in organ donation is really quite extraordinary. You know, what that was behind the creation of those roles was to try, you know, to create this specialist team, the consultants as well. It's easy to forget that we sit in an area which still has two of the world's leading hospitals in transplantation. You know, Roy Kahn and Professor Walworth many years ago in their transplantation work. You know, Roy Kahn was an extraordinary man, likewise Professor Walworth. But you know, Mike Nicholson has developed a machine which is extraordinary for keeping organs perfused, and so they still continue to push the boundaries. And you know, the work of the transplantation surgeons, it's easy. I spoke to one last week. I was down at Royal Papworth. You know, these surgeons are out and about. There are the National Organ Retrieval Service. They are limited in number. You know, you can be in Liverpool and you then need to be flown to Newcastle or somewhere like that to undertake retrieval. And, you know, that is saving lives. But, you know, it is the gift of life. It is as simple as that. You know, a family are going through the worst moment of their lives, and yet they are prepared to agree to donation of organs. And we organised a talk down at the Royal Society of Medicine in June, which was very well received indeed. And to listen to a little boy called Ari, who died sadly in a tragic accident. His mother and father are just extraordinary. And, you know, when you see, they have a lovely picture from a child who said, "Thank you for my heart." And that's what happened. And it happened in Cambridge. You know, a little girl came out from elsewhere and her mother, a freak accident again, and her mother and father agreed to organ donation, and she went on to save many lives as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you, David. Jeff, followed by Lucy and then by Alex.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm asking a lot of questions today on mortuaries and the coroner service, and people may think that I've got a particular interest in morbidity and death, but this is what is in front of us. And one thing that particularly strikes me about this report, and which has surprised me, which is that there were 3,166 referrals, but only 7 PDFs prevention, and that seems an inordinately low number. So one of the question really is, well, it's twofold actually, if I may, because I want to follow up from Chairman's point as well, is what is that criteria that triggers that recommendation? Or sorry, it's not a you can't recommend, you make your statement on prevention of death. And actually there is, it seems to me, something that we can do, because we can determine policies that arise from this. And one policy that I feel particularly strongly about, which I suspect is not in place, is mental health with young children. And why I say I was surprised that at the low number of recommendations. My wife is a psychotherapist. She was a school psychotherapist, not in this county, and had to deal with, over a period of years, a number of suicides of young people. I say she had to deal with the after effect on the children in the school, but they are taking place, and as my understanding, they're taking place more frequently, but partly because of social media and other pressures. So question is, I mean, specifically perhaps on young people, is that more prevalent? And are you seeing that? And why would that not trigger one of your prevention of death reports?
I mean, it is a statutory framework, so the schedule is very tightly drawn. It is a report about the prevention of future deaths. So if that situation no longer exists at the time of your inquest hearing, there is no need for a PFD. So there may well be many shortcomings in a death in a hospital setting where what's known as an SIR, so a serious investigation report conducted by the trust, exposes a number of factors that contributed to the death, but they will often produce an action plan by the time that gets to a final inquest hearing. And of course, that then means that the issue has been addressed. And that's often the scenario now. But there will be, I think reports have to be good and justified, really, rather than writing them for the sake of writing them sometimes. That's the point. Hence the car park one, there was a point in time where that needed action, and it followed. And I think the dementia one actually might have generated a PFD, I think, from memory.
Thank you. Sorry, David, go ahead.
Yeah, they are important. I mean, I start a 3-week inquest on Monday, and there are a number of issues which we will need to address about the state of knowledge on cardiogenic shock. So how do you address undifferentiated shock? So the NEWS system, which is the National Early Warning Score System, now NEWS 2, is a great sort of set of physiological parameters that can tell nurses and doctors what's going on. Is this a deteriorating patient? But trying to work out medically sometimes is this septic shock, or is this cardiogenic shock, or is it hypovolemic shock? Those sorts of scenarios is really tricky. And within the medical profession, the European Society of Cardiology only issued some guidelines back in 2021. The Intensive Care Society issued a major paper in 2022 about cardiogenic shock, saying there isn't really a very clear defined pathway. And that's the sort of issues you then start to look at to see whether there might need to be a concern expressed.
Okay, thank you, Lucy, and then Alex.
Thank you very much for a fascinating report. There's a lot in here that's really interesting, and some of my questions or points have already been made, but not quite all. The first point I want to make is actually for Tom, and it comes from the discussion that we just had on organ donations, which I was really pleased that Philippa raised. It's such an important issue for us to try and get across to the public the impact that organ donation can have, and it's really fantastic to see here the way in which coroners can encourage that and can make it easier and make it so that a family who are willing to make that decision to donate are able to be as effective and save as many lives or have an impact on as many lives as possible. That's really positive. But I think there might be something that this committee can also do, just about raising the awareness of that by making sure that we put something out after the meeting about how important that is and how it was raised here, because I do think it's every time you get the opportunity to say to people, please sign up for organ donation, make it clear that you're happy to your family and friends that if anything happens, you're happy to have your organs donated. Every little step on that way means that more people are able to make the most of that, which is really important. So that's the first point. That's for Tom. My other questions really are about sort of patterns in this report. And there are two things that I want to focus on. The first is suicide, and the pretty horrendous figures in here for male suicide and the rate at which that is increasing. Clearly, this was a year where the pandemic had an impact. So my question really is there any indication whether those numbers are still rising or whether they have leveled off at all? And the second one is about the undiagnosed dementia case, and whether or not whether there's a pattern in increasing numbers of deaths from driving from people who have dementia, whether that is also something that we should be aware of in society as an increasing risk, and maybe something. I mean, I can see here that there have been approaches to the government about this, but maybe it is something that we all need to be taking increasingly seriously. Thank you.
I think the organ donation point in the discussions is really important, seriously. And Ari's parents will say that, you know, the first time, you know, their children were very young, and they're dealing with the horror of their son, who is very young, who has had this tragic accident. And, you know, that's the moment when they first started discussing it. But they now have two other young children. And, you know, they carry organ donor cards these days. You know, that's the discussion they had as a family. And the problem is, if you don't discuss it, it does get to the point. I mean, it is a law of deemed consent now, but they will not override a refusal by a family member, even though in theory and law they could. They will not do that morally. And so that's why the importance of those discussions is very significant. Because if everyone talks about it and says, yeah, I'm happy with that, then once a relative is presented with that, you know, they will know what those wishes were really. And, you know, 2 people a day still die waiting for an organ. You know, that is the brutal reality of the current situation. That's despite, you know, the development of what's known as donor cardiac deaths. So they moved the goalposts. It used to be a DBD, so brainstem death cases, but then they developed retrieval in donor cardiac deaths, and that, you know, made available more organs. But there is still a shortage even now. Spain is the absolute leader in the field, far above everyone else on how to deal with this. So it shows it can be done. You know, the dementia cases, I think we experienced, you know, quite a unique one-off situation there as an incident, I think, and all that came with it, and you know, court proceedings elsewhere. I'm not aware of any patterns at the moment, I must say. Suicides generally remains an incredibly worrying trend. You know, that there was lots of media coverage, as you probably know, of university students who were taking their lives in Bristol many years ago, and we saw some of that locally as well. It remains, you know, predominantly male, but more females these days as well, and youngsters. You know, that has been a deeply worrying issue also, inevitably, as you rightly said. You know, the North London coroner did a very significant PFD about sort of social media and so on. But you know, it's easy, seriously, and it is frightening to research how to tie the right noose to hang yourself on the internet. And that shouldn't be there, should it, as material? You know, how to take your life with helium gas and a plastic bag and so on. And there are major investigations going on at the moment about certain substances coming in from abroad where people buy them to take their own lives, basically, which is the subject of a major ongoing investigation at national level. Drug-related deaths are a major issue. Again, there is now a thing called nitazenes, which is a very powerful part of you know, the makeup of some drugs. They've been discovered locally. So there were a number of deaths in Essex quite recently. And nitazines are incredibly dangerous. And you don't know, because of course you might be thinking that you're going to be taking cocaine, but in fact it contains whatever, or heroin. Alcohol, I'm afraid to say, remains a major issue as well. And, you know, post-COVID has probably seen an increase in liver failure and so on and so forth.
Okay, thank you very much. Alex.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report and detailed discussion so far. I was really concerned as well to see the rise in suicides, especially in male suicide. And I'm particularly concerned looking at our mental health services and how much pressure is on our mental health services across the UK in terms of like waiting lists. So I was wondering, in terms of like, it's a question about awareness as well as collaboration and partnership. If you can share any views, how can we work more effectively with our health partners, especially with mental health partners, but also there's a report on the voluntary sector coming up on the agenda. How can we work more effectively, perhaps with the charities that are doing some great work in raising awareness of those issues? I know we do already a lot of work already as a county supporting some of those mental health charities, but similarly to some of the other conversations in this report, I think a lot of it is about raising awareness and working collaboration on those issues. But the picture, yeah, it is very concerning, especially when you think about the level of investment or lack of investment in prevention and the pressures that we have on our health, including mental health services at the moment across the UK. It's not only about Cambridgeshire, of course. So if you had any thoughts in terms of how can we work more effectively, especially with the charities, in terms of awareness raising of those issues. Thank you.
Well, there is an incredibly effective sort of public health driven suicide prevention group. There is a national strategy for that, and they have done some incredible work locally. So they do have effectively a forum which brings in Mind and other organizations, and you know, they've made some really successful bids. You know, I'm not part of their team, it's fair to say, but where they secured funding, for example, for counselling, you know, post for a family who have lost a relative and are bereaved through a potential suicide, for early support and counselling, you know, through that input, and which is of huge comfort to families. You know, that happens in road traffic collisions as well, I would add. There's a wonderful charity called the Road Victims Trust who do huge amounts of work to support those who are victims from road traffic incidents as well. But they've done some great work, you know, locally on suicide prevention.
If I just may add to that, I think collaboration is one of those key words that you mentioned, and I think that's really, really key. Certainly at the time where, you know, a lot of the services are struggling resource-wise, and I think what I would say is we do have a really good relationship across the local authority and with voluntary organisations. So certainly with our public health colleagues, and they do commission quite a lot of services. So actually having those conversations, raising the concerns of some of the things that we see helps feed through to some of the services that they commission and how they commission, and things to look out for. And likewise, we have, again, good links with our sort of social care teams, adults and children. I think it's really important that we use those collaborations, partnerships, expertise that we have collectively, because it's only collectively we're going to make a real difference. And I think increasingly that is the key to success going forward. So as David says, there are some well-established strategies and mechanisms in place, but it's what we do on a daily basis. It's those relationships and making that embedded, so it's actually the norm. It's not the exception when these discussions take place with colleagues.
Yeah, we worked very closely with some researchers at Cambridge University. I mean, Professor Simon Barrancone, you may have heard of, who is one of the world's leading experts in autism. But one of his colleagues, Sarah Cassidy, was a leading researcher in trying to establish links between autism and suicide. And they did a major piece of research. I mean, it was outstanding. And we made available our coroner's files, you know, to give you an idea on collaboration, because of course we hold a lot of the key information on the events that lead to a death. And they produced their paper, they probably produced a few by now, but which established that, you know, the rate of suicide in those who have autism is markedly elevated. It's I can't remember the figure now, but it's probably about 8 times the norm And it's the same with learning disabilities as well. The mortality rate in those with learning disabilities is incredibly elevated. No doubt, because it's difficult, to take a clinical history from somebody who may have a disability and so on. So hence why they then created LEADER, which is about, looking at deaths involving those with learning disabilities.
Thank you. I just had a quick question for you, Peter. And we did email earlier this week. Do Peterborough City Council, do they provide the town hall free of charge, or they charge us for it? And what's the arrangement there?
No, it's a good question. It is one that gets raised reasonably regularly, but we don't pay for that. So my view is it's a service that's benefiting Peterborough, albeit it's contracted out to the county to deliver. So we don't pay for those facilities. Also, we do have to, as here, they are used by committees and things. So we do have to timetable in our use of those. But yeah, we don't pay for those facilities at all.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. Are there any other questions from anyone at all, or any other points? Well, thank you very much both for coming, and David particularly. I know you're extremely busy, and it's good to see you today. And thank you
very much,
both of you, taking the time to answer all our questions. We're actually only being asked to note the report, and I think quite a few points came up. And thanks to both of you for sort of highlighting issues. I know Lucy mentioned about the organ donation, and perhaps something we can do in the media after this meeting to highlight the need for that. The case in Hertfordshire, I think that's something we need to talk perhaps to our domestic violence team about, just get their perspective on it. And the issue of autism, I wasn't aware. I think you said, did you say, David, 8 times more likely?
Yeah, it is. I think it's about there. Yep.
Yeah.
Very elevated.
So I think there's a few things we can follow up on, and perhaps we could minute that, Nick, as part of the report. That would be really handy. Thank you both. We're happy to note the report. Yeah, we are. Appreciate your time. Thank you. So the next item is item 6, which is Support Cambridgeshire update. This is the work carried out by Support CAMS, and that will be presented by the Head of Communities, Jill Buckingham. And I'd also like to welcome the Chief Executive of Hunts Forum of Voluntary Organisations. That's Julie Farrow. Welcome both.
Yeah, it's obvious, isn't it? Thank you, everybody. Julie and I are here today to share with you 2 reports that were produced by Support Cambridgeshire. And just by way of background, I just wanted to give you 2 key areas to highlight, one about Support Cambridgeshire itself and the other about the 2 reports, and then we're happy to take questions. So Support Cambridgeshire is a partnership between our 2 main infrastructure organisations for the voluntary sector in Cambridgeshire. So that's Julie's organisation, which is the Hunts Forum, and then Cambridge Council for Voluntary Service. And they operate a contract from us since 2016 and they operate under the umbrella of Support Cambridgeshire. And this is an offer that's for all voluntary and community organisations across the whole of the county. It offered training, support, representation, and a really good funding portal, which the return on investment on that alone is sort of covers a lot of the investment that we make, more than. The 2 reports that you have today, one of them is an annual report that you may have seen previous iterations, which is the state of the sector. That predates the Support Cambridgeshire contract by some time. We think at least 15 years that annual survey has been taken, and it is a survey that goes out to all voluntary and community organisations. It's pushed very hard by the infrastructure organisations, shared widely. And then that is obviously the voluntary returns. So that one you may have seen before, but it gives a really good year-on-year snapshot of how things are in the voluntary and community sector. The second report is a new one. So for the first time, this is a piece of work that was commissioned by Support Cambridgeshire. And this is slightly different because it only I say only, it exclusively focuses on the registered charities in Cambridgeshire. And the registered charities, it doesn't match exactly across to the voluntary and community sector because there are small organisations, which is the core work, the core clients for the infrastructure support are often not yet at the stage, or never will be at the stage, where they want to be registered as a charity. So you can't quite match the two, but between them, they do provide really useful information that then informs the work of Support Cambridgeshire. So Support Cambridgeshire can respond to the changing picture and the demands and the requests and the needs of their sector. It also informs the work of my team, the community service, and I thought it'd be very interesting reading for members of the committee also. So Julie has the detail and will answer some of the questions, but we're very happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jill. Do we have any questions at all? Philippa?
Well, it's not really a question, it's just a comment. I represent Trumpington, and this year we've started 2 new groups, one of which is headed to be a registered charity, and one of which is hopefully not, but can shelter under the umbrella of another one. And they're both being helped by Support Cambridgeshire, but also the knowledge that there is a commissioning process in there. So, for example, one is a repair cafe. Cambridge Carbon Footprint are commissioned by the county. It's good to know that that process is in there when one is using public funds and trying to use them well. So I just want to say that year after year after year, I have found supporting Cambridge, or I still think of it as CCVS, is a place to point people to, or be helped by yourself. It was interesting during the discussions about making connections, and I was interested that didn't actually come into your report here. There were many of the smaller groups and charities brought together by CCVS to make points to the GCP and educate them in ways perhaps they were quite surprised by, in terms of the nitty-gritty of how to help those sort of social interactions in times of difficulty with transport. So it's generally a thank you. And thank you for a very clear report, because I like that sort of detail. And, colours help a bit, but it's mainly actually the district councils. It's really important that we on the county are aware of the differences among the districts. But I'm very much according to your trend in that, yes, 2 new ones in city, we must help the other districts benefit as well. Thank you.
Thank you. If I just respond about your little comment revolving around bringing people together, and you won't have seen it in this State of the Sector survey. The State of the Sector survey has been going for 15 years. It has a set format, and we add things in that are relevant each year, but it only is a portion of the work that we do. And the networking, which is bringing groups together, enabling them to talk and actually discuss activity, comes into our annual review, which is not this document. So the annual review and the annual impact report will be due in January, at the end of our next contract period and the start of the next financial year from our contracting point. And that's where you'll see the impact of our connections and bringing people together. That's where that will be.
Okay, thank you, Alex, and then Claire, and then Bryony.
Thank you, and thank you for this report. I found it very interesting to see the state of the voluntary sector in our area, and I do relate with my non-councillor hat on working in the third sector. I do relate to so many of the challenges, like running a small organization myself, so I could see some of, especially in terms of the funding, especially like the challenges around core funding as well. I think there's a big challenge in terms of the cost of living. Of course, like, as you say in the report, after COVID, there was no time to relax or think about strategy because the cost of living really hit the sector and increased the need for capacity. I was really surprised to see that only 20% of income comes from local and central government. So this just highlights the huge role that philanthropy, other donations, and the mix of funding has in the sector in general. I was also quite not surprised, but it was really good to see it in the report that the largest categories by spending are social services, followed by child daycare and nurseries. And I couldn't help but think, like reading that, where some of, big part of the funding goes, thinking that as we have more pressure on our state services, we are actually putting onto the voluntary sector to deliver services that the state used to provide, perhaps in the past to a larger extent. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts around, this relationship with local and central government, because what seems to be happening in some areas of work is like a national policy creating perhaps some issues, and then we're still putting local and central government money to meet the demand that's the cost of living, for example, in this case, created in the first place. So it was really interesting from like with the third sector hat on myself. 2 questions, one on volunteer recruitment. There are, of course, challenges around recruitment and retention of volunteers as well. I was wondering if you could comment on some of the relationships you have with the different businesses that offer volunteer days or free days to their staff. I know in Cambridge there are a few companies that actually encourage volunteering, in the sense you're paid for the day, but actually the take up, this is just my anecdotal knowledge, the take up is not as high as you'd expect. So what can we do more to perhaps work with businesses who can afford to allow staff time, paid staff time to volunteer, and actually encourage volunteering in the local community, especially in small organizations who may benefit from that support. Again, on volunteering, for example, the asylum seekers we have in our county, they don't have the right to work, but they have the right to volunteer. That's not perhaps known by many smaller organizations in terms of the legal framework. So again, perhaps some opportunities there, but especially around business collaboration, to be really interesting to see how we could look at volunteer recruitment and retention there. And I'm sure there's already a lot of work being done with businesses. And my second question is around the core cost funding. What I notice, and this is more my experience working in the sector, is that when we have a small organization, a lot of the focus is, of course, getting the funding wherever you can and getting stuck in very small grant projects that perhaps move you away from the core purpose of the organization that you set up to do in the first place. And it's always a balance between sticking to what you set up to do and where the funding is, and moving kind of your aims in terms of that. So yeah, I was wondering perhaps how could maybe the council support or other partners that we work with to actually provide training and support for small charities to actually think about things like strategy, the funding mix, and the longer term funding, to actually be confident to perhaps apply for multi-year grants, or something that speaking as from a small organization perspective, it is very challenging with lack of capacity when you don't have any staff that are full-time to actually think about like what can you prioritize in terms of funding. So I was wondering if there's any kind of local support in terms of training the small organizations and the often part-time or volunteer-based staff to actually know how to prioritize what funds to apply for, and how to have that balance between their aims and objectives and values and the funding that is in fact available to them. So I have a lot of questions, partly shows my background in the sector, but I feel like those 2 on volunteers and the core cost funding are 2 of the challenges experienced across the UK that we hopefully we can work together on. Thank you.
Okay, so good news first. So let's talk about the fact that this week we launched a new volunteer portal. We managed to get some funding from the Police and Crime Commission and some from the Integrated Care System to actually develop a brand new volunteer portal. So all volunteering opportunities in one place. And we've managed to get it for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, but there were 2 doors, a Cambridgeshire door and a Peterborough door, and I'm only bothered with a Cambridgeshire door. And it had a soft launch on Monday of this week to voluntary organisations across the county. We have a programme of work that we're doing involving around supporting organisations to have really think about their volunteering opportunities, what they look like, what they mean, what can they do, revolving around encouraging people to actually volunteer. So making things a little bit more exciting and things that people really want to do, because people can get stuck, or organizations can be stuck in this. These are the roles we've always had, and that's what we always need. But we all know everything's changed. So the volunteer portal was something we knew that actually was a really exciting opportunity for us. And we've managed to get 3-year funding for it. So we're really pleased. A hard launch is going to be in January. So getting the organisations to put their roles on the site first, and then we'll go out to the the general public in January, revolving around New Year's resolutions. Have you thought about kind of thing? There is a business element to that as well as a statutory element. So we know that there are volunteers in all our organisations and in all the connections that we have, no matter where they are and who they are. So statutory partners have volunteering opportunities. There'll be a bit on there that, so the site will be open to everybody, but we'll phase people in. We want to get voluntary organisations on there first. We're also really keen to actually work with our businesses. And I smiled slightly, I'm afraid, when you said about, you know, the day a week or the day to go and do volunteering, because to be perfectly honest, that's not what voluntary organisations want. I talk to organisations all the time, and I went and visited Magpas a few weeks ago. It was really great to visit their new campus, literally around the corner from here. And I was talking to them about their volunteering program, and they were saying they had a team out and they did the garden. He said, that's not, yes, it's helpful, it's nice, it's a one-off, but actually what you need are regular volunteers. And so employer volunteering schemes is what we're looking at. That's what we're looking to develop even more so in Cambridgeshire, and actually talking to businesses about the fact that what we're after is the skills in your organisation. So have you got a program of, you know, developing your staff, you know, new and up and coming people that actually want to get a bit of experience of giving their experience to an organisation over a period of time. It could be 2 hours once a month. It could be 2 hours once a quarter, but actually that intelligence and the business acumen that they've got, transferring that to a voluntary organisation is much more important to that organisation than one day painting a fence, painting a room, or doing some gardening. Actually doesn't really mean anything that bit. So that's one of the things that we're trying to do with the volunteer CAMS portal. It's a bit of a strategy we've got revolving around that, because recruitment and retention, not only of volunteers, but of staff within all our organisations, actually is really difficult for all of us at the moment. We've lost volunteers because of the cost of living, because volunteers have had to go back to work if they've been, you know, older and they might have retired early. They've gone back to work because they can't afford to do things. So we've just lost people. So I think that's really exciting, and we'll keep that updated on that. And please, at the end of the session, I'll make sure that actually you've got the link to the portal so you can go and have a look. It looks amazing. I have to say, I'm really proud of the team that have pulled it together. They've done a fabulous job. It's really good. If I go on to the question revolving around core costs and support for small organisations in particular, it's absolutely what we do. That's part and parcel of what we support organisations to think about. And if the one thing I would ask any member here to do is actually talk about Support Cambridgeshire, say, do you know about this organisation? Do you need support? Go here. This is where you could go. So we run training courses about thinking about strategy. They're not geared at, you know, employed staff. They're geared at anybody working in a voluntary organisation. We do one-to-one support with groups, as well as doing, you know, support in a group setting or online. We're really, really flexible about what we do. And we've got a new programme that started 2 weeks ago about working with ALIA, about trying to encourage organisations to think about, do you need to trade? Is it something you need to do? Because a mixed bag of funding is really important for all organisations in this day and age. You know, so we do a whole range of activities and try and link with everybody, and it's free to everybody that wants it.
Can I just add? So in terms from the volunteer side of things, Julie and I were just talking, and in our next monitoring meeting, and in our, you know, our regular contact, how we can work together with the new policy adopted by Cambridge County Council for for our own staff, who can give 37 hours of paid time as volunteers, and we hope that that's going to whet people's appetite rather than be the beginning and end of what we will be offering. And the other thing about the core costs, absolutely, I started my career in the 80s in the voluntary sector, and it was an issue then, and it's just never gone away. And we have to keep reinventing ourselves to sort of present as a new project. And just to say again, I think this is what we're modelling here: is Cambridge County Council is giving some security with a minimum of a 3-year contract to fund the core costs of the core bit of the voluntary sector of the infrastructure, or a significant contribution to the core costs, so that the focus can be on the service delivery and not forever chasing the next pot of funding.
Thank you very much, both Claire and then Bryony.
Yes, thank you. I think this might be a question for Jill. In the first part of the paper, in fact, the very first point, when you're talking about the new form of grant, you mentioned about the work of local councils, and the fact that the new arrangement provided an opportunity to develop a long-term approach. Is this to prevent or to prevent overlap or to help district councils in their service grants that maybe cover several years? Is that what you're talking about there?
So this was an approach that was adopted back in 2016. That was when it was new to us. Prior to that, I think there were lots of different individual grants, and then in 2016 there was a big piece of work and looking at combining all of that work into the one contract. But yes, it's certainly something that we're talking to our district and health colleagues with as well, to ensure that we're not putting too many conflicting demands on our partners in the voluntary sector, trying to work and streamline.
Thank you, Bryony.
Thank you. It may be more covered in your annual report, which you've mentioned, but bearing in mind the cost of living crisis and the frankly shocking amount of children we have living in poverty, how can we cost support those charities give through recycling, rehoming of food and electrical goods through food hubs and repair type cafes, and, you know, sort of equivalent amount to what that would have cost had they had to go to a shop and that kind of thing? And is there ever any work been done in terms of the figures of how much it would have cost if volunteers were paid an equivalent amount in real living wage and the actual amount that this sector covers?
Yeah, two really good questions. Thank you very much. If I go to the one first revolving around, so much activity going on revolving around food, recycling, supporting the old swapping. Actually, I've got something I no longer need, goes on a site. People actually say, I live in your area, I'll pick it up and I'll have that free. And actually, there's so much of that going on. So and there's a network of organisations right the way across the county. So there's no duplication. And what you find is that actually there's activity going on in one area. And actually, I'll give you an example of a Fenland, to be honest, because of Fenland organisations, when they're looking at food and food distribution, they're working with farmers, and so they're getting fresh food. So if you talk to Treasure Trust, it's not often, there's not a huge amount of fresh food there, but actually each area have their own connections revolving around what they can do and who they can actually connect with, and therefore can get additional to. So I know, for example, in Finland, they've got connections with farmers. I know, for example, on the Oxmoor, we're based on the Oxmoor, and the local food bank there actually have connections with Tesco's, but all the big supermarkets, anybody that actually is, actually thinking about things that are end of shelf life, they go to the food bank automatically. It's collected, it's then distributed, and then additions are added to food parcels, particularly for families, to ash fresh fruit and all those kind of things. So there's a whole network of things going on, and it is monitored revolving around with the connections that they've got with the food poverty hubs and networks that are right the way across the county. Fabulous work that's going on, I have to say. We do interact with that, but actually it's so well organised. They don't need a lot of support from us. Although I have to say that when there's a couple of them who have been struggling with premises, we've been able to actually link them to either a district council or a town council to say, look, this is providing a very particular service. Actually, is there nothing that you can do to help? And we've managed to get them actually premises that they actually got somewhere to go, which is really good. Could you remind me your second question? Sorry.
If we actually costed the amount of time.
Yeah. Do you know, this is one of those things that come up all the time. There is a formula, and we could do that. And I don't have the figures off the top of my head, but I think it's something in the region of. So I have to say that this week, the National Voluntary and Community Organisation, so there's a big council that covers the whole country. They've just reduced their almanac for 2023, and I read it, or briefly, I scanned it. I think it's about £13 billion volunteers actually deliver. And I think that actually is 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 underestimate, because actually people don't count their time in the same way. I don't think. Well, there is a formula, and it's something that we could do, but we haven't at the moment, because we're concentrating, and we have been, since COVID, concentrating on doing the do and supporting those organisations that really need supporting. And I have to say that one of the things, and I'm going to get this in, one of the things that's been really difficult is moving from COVID into cost of living is, just like everybody else, we're all really fatigued and we feel as though we're on that hamster wheel all the time. There's no respite at all. And I know that we're all in the same position, but volunteers and volunteer sector is exactly the same position that everybody else. But we haven't had the capacity to do that bit. But the formula is there, and we could trial it on one bit, and it's maybe something that we think about.
Thank you very much, Jeff.
Thank you, Jim. Fairly quick question. The report, unless I've missed it, doesn't show comparatives. And I think you did say that you thought volunteering had actually gone down in recent years because of the cost of living crisis. On the other hand, we know that there's a lot of people who've taken early retirement who you would have thought would have welcomed volunteering opportunities. Obviously, your portal is going, hopefully will attract them. But the question that has come into my mind is, are there volunteering opportunities that exist or will be advertised on the portal, which people won't take up? I mean, some of those people who are now available want to do particular things. They want to work with children, or they want to work with a particular sector, arts, I don't know, but some things that people won't touch at all.
That's difficult for me to answer, but what I can say is nationally volunteering has dropped. So it's not just locally, it's nationally. The impact of COVID on everybody have been that some people made a choice to retire early because they could afford to retire early, or they made a choice that actually they used to volunteer and I couldn't do anything because I was housebound for a period of time, and I want to go off and do the things that I want to do. So we've seen a real shift in who's volunteering rather than who's willing to volunteer. So we know, so anecdotally from the organisations that we work with, that a lot of older people who used to volunteer regularly no longer do it because they want to go off and see their family or go off and do things because they were restricted so much. And it may be that they'll come back, but we just don't know. I think some of the issues from a voluntary sector perspective are that voluntary organisations, and I'm being honest here, voluntary organisations don't necessarily move with the times quickly enough. We're quite slow and clunky. And, we want somebody physically in the building to do this or somebody to do that. And it's a regular thing every week. That's not necessarily what everybody wants these days. And so what people choose to do, that's one of the things that we're trying to do with the volunteer portal, is get them to think differently, get them to think about micro-volunteering that somebody could do at home. If they don't want to come out, they just want to do something that actually benefits them. So think about, the RSPB when they do their bird counting. Loads of people do that. They do it at their home, they go in the garden over the weekend and tick little boxes, and that is cast as volunteering. It's a vital piece of research. So we're trying to get the voluntary sector to think differently about what it is they want as volunteers, to make those opportunities exciting, something that people really want to do. So that's one of the things that we hope the portal will give us the opportunity to do in a better way than we've been able to do before. I'm not sure that's helped, but it's the only answer I've got.
Brilliant, thank you. Philippa, go on. Yeah.
Second one is prompted by this exchange we've had between Bronwyn and Jill. Sorry, Julie, actually, but it's Jill's probably business. We're finding with one of the groups that we're sort of starting to set up, there are people in the community who've got the skills, but they are more or less self-employed. They are only just about managing to pay the bills, and it would be quite nice to just pay them for small scale jobs, particularly event organizing or bookkeeping or whatever. And although we couldn't afford the top prices, I do wonder whether sometimes the grant givers do need to be able to allow for paid volunteers. If there is some sort of way of putting a price on that, I suppose it would be something like the minimum wage, really, so that we could have that combination of paid volunteers and actual ones. so that we can also get that local involvement from the people who, who are helping their neighbours and would like to do more, but really can't afford even an hour when they could be just topping up their wages somewhere else.
I do take your point, and I think it's a very good point. It's nationally a bit of an issue, actually paid volunteers revolving around volunteering. So some organisations do what we do. So Hunts Forum has a system in place where instead of, if we've got a new piece of work that's coming in, instead of going out and employing a new member of staff, especially if it's only for a few months, so anything below 6 months, we don't employ a new member of staff, but we go out and what we get is an associate, so somebody that we know. So actually that we pay them to do that, but they take the responsibility of paying their tax and insurance and what have you on it, because that's the other thing that you've got to remember. So it can't be classed as volunteering because they're being paid. Charity Commission would have a really difficult time with that unless actually they change the rules dramatically. So it's about how can you facilitate it, what is it you can do, and how can we support people to do it.
Okay, there's no other questions or comments. I don't think we say this anywhere near enough, but thank you very much Julie, for all that you do, and the role of volunteers is invaluable. I mean, you said 13 billion. That's a very low estimate. Probably so much they do, and so much I know Hunts Forum do. As I said, sit on the board there, so I see what work you do day in, day out. And also thank you very much, Jill, for coming along and for your report and your time. And we're just being asked really to note the key findings of the report, which I think we're all happy to do. So I appreciate your time. Thank you. So moving on to item 7, which is Cambridgeshire Skills 6-month review. That's to hear from Tom Malloy, who is our head of service.
Thank you, Chair. So we've had a really good 6 months. Lots of positives to report, which are in the report. I just wanted to flag a few things before taking questions. So you will see in the report that we've seen some increase in funding, and while that is certainly a positive, I think I also just want to flag to members and the committee that 75% of our funding is what is called is cost-based, so it's not a unit price. So as prices go up and our costs increase, likely, we will see fewer learners being enrolled because the cost of delivery is going up, salaries, utilities, etc., etc. Also, as we have got better targeting need, we're now delivering more learning in areas of deprivation, and the Combined Authority very generously provide an 8% uplift on learners from wards of what are they always called? Lower layer super outputs. Just had to remember that down. So I said it's a positive story, but actually it's more about stability than actual real growth. We've also got good distribution across the patch. Again, we are very, mindful of working to address local need, and then you'll see that from the distribution of our learning. Curriculum highlights, again, the big success and challenge equally is ESOL. We've had, ESOL demand is just going through the roof, and it continues to, and we're doing our best to meet that, whether that's at the various asylum hotels, or still with Ukrainian guests, and just general demand. So we've gone from 2 tutors a year ago to 11, and as you see in the report, the number of ESOL learners just continues to grow. And as of September, with the new academic year, there's no sign of that growth declining. Let's see where we're going next. One of the other key successes over the last 6 months, 12 months, has been increased improved work with partners across the council. I'd like to give credit here to Lisa Riddle, I think, because she certainly supported that with sort of creating a collaborative culture in the services that she manages. And it was just interesting listening to the previous speakers about communities, because that's one area where we're doing work in providing the introduction to volunteering qualification that the communities team deliver. So as well as that, we're working, with the early years team, and of course, as we get to in more detail later, the work that we're doing with the traveller health team, which is exceptional. So at the last committee where I brought the 6-month report, so not the last committee, members asked that I provide more detail on the work that we do with the Gypsy, Roma and traveller community. And as you can see there, there's some exceptional work from the traveller health team. Again, having to name names and recognise the superb work that Rose Wilson does. She's been recognised nationally, but the work that she does in engaging with the community and providing them pathways into learning and training and ultimately employment. And the numbers that she had and the number of partner organisations they had at the events, the learning events over the summer was a real huge success. So all in all, a very good year. I think looking forward for the next 6 months, we are confident we're in a very strong position. There are still things I'd like to improve in terms of getting more maths learning. I think, again, we've got the multiply funding that we've got and we've seen an increase in. I think that's going to be difficult to deliver without finding more maths teachers, and that isn't easy. But as I said, as we move forward, it's looking very positive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Any questions from anyone? Claire?
Yeah, thank you very much for the report. You mentioned that the CPCA funding is now on a 2-year cycle. What's the longer term funding? I mean, 2 years is better than 1 year, but it's not a very long time. So what longer term funding do you have?
I don't know. It's a simple answer to that. I think, again, we've got to see what happens with the next round of devolution to see what is in the pot. But at the moment, horizon scanning, I think that all of the parties are committed to devolution. And I think that is something which will stay. All of the parties have a commitment to skills development moving forward to the next election. But I think I'm not concerned. It's not something that I feel that's at risk. But as I said, it's pure. So I can't really speculate what's beyond that 2 years.
Yeah, and I've got a completely different question, and that's to do with the point about the travellers and the public health team and the really good work there. And I just think it sort of highlights what we were mentioning earlier, that the work across committees, the work between this committee and health, and also here within the report. And one thing that we've brought out at previous meetings is the importance of public transport for getting people to and from these courses. So I think we could as a committee bring together those elements and maybe have a discussion about those cross-committee elements. But thank you for the report.
That's a good idea, Claire. Thank you. That's a good point. Alex, you're next.
Thank you for the report. And it's really good to see more detail on the work with the GRT community, especially. I really enjoyed looking at the case studies. So I think if we can have more of those case studies, it does put a face to the work as well, and it does inspire us to read more about the courses available. I'm really pleased to see the progress on ESOL, and of course, it will be surprising hearing this from me, chairing the local ESOL partnership. Actually, we have the conference tomorrow that I'm really looking forward to in Peterborough, which I think, well, it focused on pathways to employment. I think that's why I'm really keen to hear more about, and this report does mention a few of the ways in which we're linking ESOL to pathways to employment and to other type of courses. I think that's really important as a focus this year. I had a question around ESOL. It says in 2.12 that some additional funding has been secured from South Cambs District Council to deliver the English lessons to asylum seekers that are at the Bar Hill Hotel. Now, quite a few weeks ago, I visited the Dolphin and St. Ives to see some of the ESOL provision there, in addition to other types of ESOL. And it was quite good to see in person, the type of mix of learners as well as the different settings, whether it's the library in the Asylum Hotel itself or some of the churches as well around the area. So I was wondering if there are any prospects on similar arrangements in your view with the other districts that are hosting those hotels. So of course we have the hotel in Wisbech and the hotel in St. Ives in Huntingdonshire. So I was wondering if you had any conversations in terms of kind of similar arrangements, because I know you're providing the ESOL classes in all of the hotels, but it seems like the arrangement with South Camps is a bit more advanced or different compared to the other two locations. Thank you.
Yes, it is different. And the reason for that is because of the combined authority funding rules. So an asylum seeker needs to be in the UK, anywhere in the UK, for 6 months before they're eligible for funding. At the Dolphin and the Rose and Crown, those residents we discovered actually already had been here, but that the Bar Hill Hotel, they kind of came straight here. So actually they weren't eligible for funding. So then what South Cams were able to do with some of the money that they had available from the Home Office was to provide something to bridge until those residents become eligible for CPCA funding. So that's why there's a different arrangement to sort of bridge that 6 months.
Thank you. That makes sense for the clarification. I was just wondering why it's different in one area compared to the other two, because indeed when I went to the Dolphin, most of the guests there have been for over 6 months. I mean, that's one of the issues with the asylum process is the huge backlog and long waiting times. That's why it's even more important we provide ESOL so people can practice their skills before they get the outcome for their application. But thank you very much for clarifying that.
Thank you. I was also going to pick up on that point 2.1.2. So is that just purely a combined authority policy decision? It's not something that they've been told they can't do by central government. They've just decided the 6 months rule is the reality for asylum seekers then before they can receive funding.
I need to double check, Chair, but I'm 80–90% sure that the CPC have just copied or implemented the DFE rules that are national, because I'm not in one. I haven't checked what the 22–23 rules say for national, but I'm pretty sure they will be, but I'll certainly get clarification to confirm that.
Thank you. That will be useful. I'm sure you're correct, but and well done to South Cambridgeshire District Council for helping with that funding. Well done for them. To them. Anybody else at this stage at all? Ros?
Yes, the 2.5 on the work with the traveller community is really great to read. What, yeah, I guess I don't know the size of the traveller community in relation to, and so how is there a lot of capacity in relation to the size of the traveller community, or is there, a lot more that could be done?
There is more that could be done, I think, again, and I can only really compare it to having I've worked at 3 other local authority adult learning services, and Norfolk and Luton were 2 other areas where there was a reasonable GRT community. But in Cambridgeshire, we've got a much better engagement with that community. And I think that's partly down to the kind of the great work and partnership that the Traveller Health team have created across the piece. So I think that the answer is that certainly, if we look at the numbers, they are more from the north of the county, Fenland and in East Cam. So, but yeah, certainly more that could be done, but not. I'm saying that in a negative way. I just think again, it's positive, but it's not complete.
Okay, thank you. And let's just have another question as well on where are we? So it's 2.55, I think it is. Yes, it is. So the Gypsy Roma travel community, so they integrated quite well with non-traveller families, which I think is excellent. That both their families and non-traveller families attending that event didn't use local leisure facilities for swimming and sports because of lack of confidence, and they were too expensive, which is quite interesting, isn't it? And I think that's mainly run by district councils. I don't think we have leisure centres in South Cambridgeshire, but certainly in other parts of Cambridgeshire, maybe that's something to look at, that they don't take that initial step to get involved in for activities like that. What do you think we could do to help that, Tom?
I think that the first thing to say is that, let's put that in context. We're talking about with anecdotal from that community and some of the others associated. But I think it's twofold. I think, again, it's not just leisure facilities. I think, again, we've got the same challenges with bringing them into to skills, into libraries. I think that there's a wider piece of work there, and I think the work that we do is beginning to break down some of those barriers. Wouldn't necessarily say it's just about leisure facilities. I think the cost thing, I think that's just across the piece. Things are getting more expensive relatively for all people, and unfortunately, there's a lot of this community who are economically disadvantaged, so we'll be feeling it harder.
Thank you. And also, I was quite interested in 2.5.3 with a strand of work on adult literacy. And that's linked into getting HGV licenses, which I know HGV drivers are much sought after, aren't they? So that's a good sector to get into. What was that was that the idea behind that then?
I think it was, and it was something that members of the community were expressing an interest in actually getting into. So there was also a change last year when there was the national shortage. Was it last year or the year before with HGV drivers? For the first time, FE providers were able, if they had the facilities, were able to fund HGV driving. Previously, it was something that could only be done, by private organisations, and this was something that Peterborough Regional College did. So we were able to, the Traveller Health team were able to make a link there to actually provide the literacy, do the HGV theory element, and then they were able to progress on to the regional college to actually get their license and then find work, as you saw in the case study of Sean.
It's a very good piece of work. Anybody else wish to comment or ask a question at this stage? Well, thank you very much, Tom, for coming today and for the report and for all you do. Greatly appreciated. So we just asked to note the contents of the report, which I think we've done, and then we'll move on to item 8, which is performance monitoring report, Q1. Over to you, Sue.
Thank you very much, Chair. So this performance report represents the performance of all the services that report through to this committee, and we're looking at Q1 of this financial year. Obviously, a number of the services we've already discussed in some detail today and looked at the performance around the coroner service and the skills service. You have quite a lot of data there, which is supported by the tables at the back. I know the committee previously has made comments on the indicators with reference to the library service, active users and visits, and I just want to point out that they're moving in the right direction and the trend continues to be upwards, and we're really pleased to see that children's use of libraries is back to where it was pre-pandemic, and certainly a lot of activity taking place in the libraries over the summer with children with the summer reading challenge and the arts programme as well. So I don't intend to say any more. If there are any questions around performance, we'll endeavour to answer them, but if we need to refer to our colleagues in the relevant services, we'll take questions away and ensure that the committee has the response to any queries that you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Any questions or comments from anyone? Looks like everyone's, well, Claire, go on. I was going to say everyone's happy. You're always happy, Claire, but I know you've got a question.
Well, it's a very general comment. It's good to see the report. It's good to see the indicators. It would be really helpful to have more of your views on where perhaps things are not going so well. And I don't know if you can comment a bit more on that, but just to give us more of a sort of amplified view on where you think you might have concerns and what you feel should happen in relation to those concerns.
Yes, thank you. Something we have been discussing is that what we don't bring before you is actually alongside the performance where some of the risks are that are associated in these services. And so something that we do aspire to do is perhaps to to review some of the indicators as well in the future to ensure that they are, because very conscious that some of them are kind of relate to volume of activity, and some of that activity is outside of our control. So actually, whilst you get a sense of the activity and what's happening within the service, you don't necessarily get underneath some of the performance, the qualitative information. So I think that is something we would want to consider, and I as well looking how we can bring alongside the performance just a view from each of these services of where their risks are and how they're looking to mitigate those risks. So I think that is a very helpful challenge and something we'd want to take away and consider further, and perhaps work with members on developing so that we can bring something back that is more, that is a little bit richer in terms of its content than we have currently. It is something that Lisa and I have spoken about recently, so it's a pertinent question to raise. Thank you.
That was exactly what I was trying to get at, something that's richer, something we can get our teeth into a bit more. Thank you.
But just talking about risks and the indicators, I'm looking at one which possibly is outside your control. Percentage of businesses brought into compliance in all priority areas. I'm assuming that relates to health and safety issues, but in the previous quarter, you had 92% compliance, and this current quarter is 60. Was the previous quarter aberrant? Sorry, I'm not talking to this, am I? I mean, was it just a matter of luck that you happened to inspect particular businesses that were all, was it planned that you would go to businesses that were likely to be compliant? It's quite different from the other figures, isn't it?
It is, and that is definitely a question I'll need to take away, because Peter Gell, who was here previously, is the manager that's responsible for trading standards, and so we'll ask Peter to give the committee a more detailed response as to the differentiation between the previous figures and the current ones, and to why that is. So thank you very much for that question, and we'll take that away and ensure that you get a response. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. Lucy, you're next.
Thank you. A couple of things. Firstly, it's a shame to see so many of the library indicators still red, but I think it's worth mentioning here, and maybe you could say a bit more about it. The survey that is, I think, recently started or is underway about how people are using our libraries and how we can kind of ensure that they are providing the services that people want them to provide, because I think there's not much doubt that the way in which people operate kind of online has changed quite significantly since the pandemic. That doesn't mean that they're not necessarily using those services. It just means that they may be using them differently. And I think it's kind of worth mentioning that we're aware of that, and we are reviewing how our libraries are run and how we can best use them, because they are a really, really important and valuable community resource. But I think we just need to be mindful about how we make sure that they're being best used, and that is happening. And the other thing I wanted to say is how very pleased I am to see the one about the youth provision, the number of community youth providers, which is a new indicator, but it's so good to see that new indicator being developed, and that kind of the importance of that work being flagged up to the committee, and something that we are a way in which we're working with partners, which is also quite new, and which I'm really pleased to see that, even though that indicator doesn't actually tell us very much yet. It's important that it's there. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, so my understanding that the library survey is live at the moment. I'm just checking that. So I think what we will do off the back of this committee is just ensure everyone has got the link and access to that survey, so that you can both complete it and encourage other people to as well, and perhaps use your own social media to actually be able to pass that out. So thank you for drawing attention to that. And certainly I think it is true, and it's I mean, it's referred to actually in one of the indicators around the use of sort of IT equipment in libraries. We are seeing post-pandemic, people have bringing their own equipment. The patterns of the use of the library is different. So the use of the big chunky PCs, personal, they were called personal computers, but they're always so huge, weren't they, in libraries? But the use of those, yes, the use of that, all of that IT equipment is changing. And so actually we do want to track that. And I think as well, there's also reference in the paperwork just about how the high streets have suffered. And so where we have got town centre libraries, then actually the pattern of the public's use of town centres is also, and the drop off there is also replicated in the fall that we see, and the times of day where we're seeing fall off in library usage. So it really is something we are concerned about. We're actively looking and pursuing and developing new ideas. The survey will be invaluable in feeding that, and we do, as we've referred to in the action log at the top of the meeting, we are undertaking a deeper review of the library service and the use of the library premises, but also the activity and the offer that is delivered through not just the library service, but through the partnerships and the collaborations that they have with others. Lisa may want to say a little bit more about some of those emerging collaborations, but I'll just pause at that point. But thank you. And yes, thank you for the note around the youth activity. Yeah, we too are delighted to have that as part of our suite of indicators, and more to follow on that. So thank you.
Thanks, Sue. Yeah, just to follow on from that, we've also got the quality of life survey that we know will be published soon and will tell us some of that data about who's not using libraries. So we'll also be able to look at how we target our resource moving forwards. The survey that's live at the moment as well, it's not something that we plan to just do as a one-off. It's something that we want to revisit year on year, so that we start to build a picture and that consistent kind of evaluation of our library services. In terms of the offer and the partnership, we have begun a series of conversations with colleagues in the integrated care system about how we can best utilise the estate, really, mobile libraries as well as for the physical library buildings, to really draw in that universal health provision as well. And I think this summer, some of the mobile libraries were testing out support to health visiting, for example, alongside child and family centres. So there's a lot of new things in the pipeline and coming along. We're also in conversation with our public health colleagues around how in future years we can potentially be more strategic around some of our commissioned arrangements and providing that absolute clarity at the point of procurement around what we would like to see delivered from the estate. So really broadening out what is delivered from a library in a place. So watch this space.
Thank you. That's really helpful, and it's really good to know about that kind of range of things that we're looking at for our libraries. Because I think just picking up on Sue's comment about the way in which people are using or not using high streets differently, I think it's really one of the issues is that as some people move more and more of their lives online, for people who aren't comfortable with that, or for whom actually popping into the local shop or something is a really important part of their feeling part of their community and of their social engagement. As there's less available, the library in some ways becomes more important, even if it's only for a smaller group of people. So I think we just need to be, I think it's really helpful having that survey and that work. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. Lucy, Philippa.
Associated with that, and we have 3 members of the library's working party here. Oh, sorry, I could see Steve there, but sorry. We have multiple members here, and we're all thinking, yeah, this is great, and we know how good it is, and the survey's got some really yummy stuff in it. These are the minutes of the working party, are all very well taken by Alvina, and presumably could be made routinely available to this committee. Presumably, I mean, they're not secret, are they? Anything
I'm sure they could be.
do?
Yeah, we'll look into that. Yeah,
because I think that I feel privileged that we get that inside of you. Thank you. Do apologise.
And if there's nobody else, we've noted the contents of the report. We'll move to item 9, which is the finance monitoring report. And Claire is joining us. Welcome, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. We've got for you today the finance performance report to the.
Can you just talk a little closer to the microphone? That's great. You seem like a long way away. This is a very long.
Is that better?
That's better. Thank you.
Excellent. We've got the finance monitoring report to the end of August for you today. For the services that are under the remit of this committee, we're currently reporting an overspend as at the end of the year predicted of 69,000. So that's a fairly minor variance in the grand scheme of things. What that means is there's no significant issues to report on at the moment. They would be defined as any particular service that's under or overspent by more than 2% or 100,000. Just to bring to your attention the slightly different format this time, which is the changes are outlined in paragraph 1.5. If you look at that table, which provides the service by service detail, you'll see that we're now outlining the gross budget alongside the income budget and the net budget. So what we're doing is we're showing how much is available to be spent in services, but also how much of that comes from external income. So that's just a change in how we present it. What we used to have before was we would just show we were just showing the gross budget. So it gives a little bit more of an insight as to how the services funding is made up. And then alongside that, as usual, reporting on where we're at in terms of what we spent by the end of the period in question, and then the forecast outturn variance, which will be any predicted under or overspend. So the two services that are showing small overspends at the moment are coroners at 37,000 and public library services at 40,000 on the revenue side. And then on the capital side, the only significant variance at the moment in terms of that is on the libraries open access and touchdown project, which has been delayed. So I think there's some further details coming to the committee in future about the replanning for that funding. But that means that that the amount that we were going to spend in this financial year is less than was previously expected. And it's expected that that will push into next financial year instead. So it's more of a timing issue than it's not an underspend. It will be spent, but it will be spent later on. So I think that's all the things. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Claire. Any questions from members? No, everyone's very quiet. That's a good sign. Thank you very much, Claire, for doing that. Appreciate your time. And we've noted the contents also of that report. So we'll move on to item 10, which is the agenda plan and appointments. Any updates to the agenda plan from offices or comments from members at all? No, Philippa, yeah.
Sorry, this is going a bit off piece. We don't have a training thing on this session's agenda, and I did wonder whether any other members of the committee would be interested, like me, in some training to do with travellers, because I feel I'm ill-informed as to the pattern of traveller life in this county, the numbers we're talking about, the locations of them. Some areas really just have occasional appearances, and it's not the way I would want to be judging how we look after the population and know how the Shawns of this world can be assisted by our services. If I'm the only one, I'll do my own research, but I think it would be very helpful, and it would of course ooze out into adults and health and children and young people a bit like I do. Thank you.
I'm sure you're not the only one, so it's a very good idea. Jeff.
Thank you. Different point. I'm looking for in fact, I'm probably asking, do we get this committee get the report on the decisions on the priority fund allocations? Should that be coming to, I mean, I know that there's a small group that's deciding on the
it's coming to the March meeting. Sue reliably informs me. Coming to the March committee meeting. Sorry. The March committee meeting.
Oh, beg your pardon. Sorry, I didn't look down that far enough.
That's fine.
Beg your pardon. Sorry.
Lucy, and then Claire. Did you want to come in as well?
I just wanted to say on the.
Should we go to Lucy first, and I'll come to you later? Sorry, I wasn't sure if you had your hand up.
To say on the point about the training on a traveller community. A couple of years ago, South Cambs had a really good training package, which was done together with the police. And I think maybe it might, I don't know where that is now, maybe Councillor Batchelor would know, but it was really very good.
Thank you. Lucy?
It's also on that point on the traveller training, which I think is something would probably be relevant to all members, and we are getting the all member training up and running again. So maybe that's something that could go into the all member training. I mean, clearly some people are going to be more interested than others, but thank you.
Yeah, I think that's something we can look into, certainly. So there's nothing else. I just thank you very much for your time this afternoon and wish you a safe journey home. Take care. Thank you. Just under 2 hours, I did it.